of my next guest, the newly minted Libertarian Vice Presidential candidate. He's a former police officer, now police reform activist. His name is Mike Ter Meet, and he's joining us live from Virginia. Good morning, Mike. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, Austin. It's a pleasure to be with you and with you both. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for joining us. So I'd love to get your take and reaction to the big news story today, which is that Alex Jones, InfoWars host, will have his assets liquidated, have everything taken from him. The feds will be shutting down his operation in order to collect on a $1.5 billion judgment against him for comments that he made regarding the shootings at Sandy Hook. What's your take on that, sir?
I think the federal government is overreached where it should be. I don't have a problem with civil court playing a role where people believe that they have been defrauded, if they have been defamed. I think that civil courts actually in the United States have not done as robust a job as they probably could. And I think that the problem with civil courts not doing as good a job as they should in many cases is you get these goofy situations where governments step in and try to impose government force in ways that we don't need. I think that the federal government, by the way, state governments in all too many cases as well, have played far, far too large a role in trying to decide who it is and who it is not, who should be allowed to speak. As a matter of fact, I'm looking at you, Austin, right now, and I worry about the future of a government coming after somebody like you.
For sure. We were talking about this earlier, is that what they'll do to Alex Jones, what they'll do to Donald Trump, they'll do to us. Now, I know you're running against Donald Trump for president of the United States, but I'd love to hear your take on what the government's doing to him in New York.
I think it's a real shame. I don't think there's any question. I reject any debate at this point whether or not our criminal justice system has been politicized. There's no question about that. The big issue is what are we going to do about it, whether this is going to propagate into the future, as I believe it is likely to do so, both from Democrats and Republicans. There is undoubtedly going to be backlash. A lot is yet to play out, in my view, Austin. I'm curious how these cases are going to go against Trump. I have to admit, never bet on anything Mike Ter Meet says about what the future lay regarding jury settlements. I did not expect Trump to be found guilty on those 34 counts. That took me by surprise, and I'm quite disappointed. And you're right, don't get me wrong. There's no love lost. I have a long history of viewing Donald Trump as a goofball. I was in New York in the 80s, so I know quite well that this is a guy that you don't want to be caught protecting for a lot of reasons, but he has been served poorly by our justice system.
I mean, you're a former police officer, so not many people have seen the corruption of our system of justice up close as much as you have, right, Mike?
Well, there are corrupt elements. In large part, it is a system made up of humans, who are trying to do the right thing. There's no question about that. But is it possible for bad actors, for politically motivated people, or people who are motivated by all kinds of other weird things, people trying to get rich off the system? Is it possible to be corrupted? Absolutely. And you see that playing out.
Now, Mike, Donald Trump appeared at the convention where you were nominated for vice president as a member of the Libertarian Party. What was your take on what Donald Trump had to offer to you?
It was a bit of a disappointment. I think that we were all prepared for him to say, a couple of things trying to win us over to his side, or at least get a positive soundbite. That was no surprise. What I found a couple of things interesting. First of all, by the way, it's a great pleasure to meet, at least telephonically, your wife, Stephanie. My wife, Nancy, was with me at that event, and Nancy was the first one to say, "This feels creepy. This feels weird. I'm not sure we should be here."
Wow.
And we left. I'm not one of these guys that makes my wife sit through a program she's uncomfortable with, right? And a lot of people thought that
I'm confused, Mike. You were uncomfortable because Donald Trump was offering potentially you a spot in his cabinet?
No, he did not offer me a spot in his cabinet. He didn't offer. I've never even had an interaction with
Would you
Donald Trump.
refuse? Would you refuse?
Would I refuse? No, I would not refuse. I think that any opportunity to bring libertarianism to any government structure would be a good idea. I don't think that that's very likely. Do you?
Yes, I do actually. As a matter of fact, from what I understand and the people that I have around Donald Trump, I think it's very likely that someone like yourself could be on a short list to sit on a parole board, especially considering your background as a police officer. I think I've actually heard your name be bandied about when we're talking about pardoning people like Ross Ulbricht and Edward Snowden and many others. I think that a Mike Ter Maat sitting on a board like that would be a damn good idea, don't you?
I think it's a damn good idea too. I don't see it as terribly likely, but I would support the idea, and Julian Assange as well. I think the government has gotten itself into a weird position of running down those among us who are the greatest stalwarts for the First Amendment. I think this is a major stepping stone toward the propagation of authoritarianism and the corruption of our government in the United States. And
Oh,
the
so it
beginning of the end
sounds like
of our
you're not
structure.
as hostile to Donald Trump as many of the others within the Libertarian Party.
I'm a little bit hostile in the sense that I think he's personally a corrupt character. I think he has some libertarian instincts, right? He's anti-establishment. He looks at a lot of government established structures and views them as I do as very, very weird. And so we have some overlapping views in that sense. I wish he were a pro market guy. I wish he were pro free market. I wish he would do more to bring the troops home and close bases. I did appreciate some of the efforts he made in the Middle East to advance peace and bring folks together in a negotiated way that other administrations had not in the past. So I don't mean the guy is completely worthless. I just think that he's not the answer to
Is
our
he
government problem.
is he better than Biden?
Oh yeah, I don't think there's any question about that. It's a weird choice, but you're not setting the bar too high there this morning, Austin, saying better than Joe Biden. Joe Biden is a walking manifestation of the state.
Mike Ter Maat, I'm telling you that libertarians have got, speaking of a low bar, libertarians have gotten nothing. We have got nothing for decades. We got a tiny little tax cut with George W. Bush. We got a tiny little tax cut with Ronald Reagan. And before that, the libertarians had nothing until we go back all the way to the 1920s and Calvin Coolidge. It was a long, dark march of progressivism, great societies, Vietnam Wars, and the expansion, the massive expansion of government into our lives. So when it came to what Donald Trump had done in making a very large tax cut that truly impacted the lives of people, and in the simple fact that libertarians and Donald Trump have the same enemies, I can tell you this, that it's the reason why people like myself who have identified with the Libertarian Party in the past find myself making cause with Donald Trump, because you, me, Donald Trump, we all have the same enemies, do we not?
In many cases, that is exactly right. I appreciate where you're coming from. I'm not trying to run down your politics. Only Donald Trump, himself as a character. Look, I appreciate the fact that there was a significant tax cut. That's important, but even more important is limiting the extent to which the government is able to spend money. It is true that taxation is theft, but I think that we all need to recognize that all government spending is theft, whether it's financed by tax or by raising debt or by inflation. And so I'm skeptical of tax cuts that are not accompanied by true cap on government spending, because it just gets financed some other way that'll turn out to be taxation in the future.
You make a good point there, Mike. And I know certainly criminal justice reform being one of your major issues, you must have liked that Donald Trump passed the First Step Act, despite the fact that many Republicans, including his own MAGA base and conservative Republicans like Ron DeSantis, who ran against him on that issue, Donald Trump stood up to the conservative base and stood up for a libertarian issue and passed the First Step Act. He passed criminal justice reform. I'm sure that's something that you probably agree that was a good idea.
Damned right. And I think that there's other important steps that we can make as well. I think that we need to end the war on drugs completely. And I believe that there are important specific things that we can do to better hold our law enforcement agencies and officers accountable and move police culture in a little bit quicker fashion in the right direction. Moving any culture takes a long time, of course, and law enforcement is no different, but we can move that in a slightly accelerated fashion by getting a couple of things right.
One last question on the Trump thing, and then I want to turn to a little bit more focus on your ticket, and that is the question of the strategy of the Libertarian National Committee's chair, Angela McCardle. She seems to be looking at steering a strategy that is aimed expressly at chasing Biden out of the White House. She said, just like you said today earlier on this show, that Joe Biden is obviously worse than Donald Trump. And so she wants to steer your ticket to take Joe Biden out and remove him from the White House. How do you feel about the chair of your party's strategy there?
I don't know all about the strategy of the chair of our party. I'll have to defer to a conversation between you and her on that, and maybe she would like to be on your show and represent that. We have a ticket that I think makes a lot of sense for Americans for a lot of different reasons, not the least of which is, you're right, getting rid of Joe Biden. But I also believe that we provide a much better alternative than Donald Trump. I think that most people recognize, even, you may view the Republican Party as having some value. When I was a member of the Republican Party several thousand years ago, that was a party that represented free trade and free markets, a deregulated business environment. Wow. Those of us who believed in those principles in that party have gone in two different directions. I think it's time that Americans recognize that they have a much better alternative in the libertarian platform.
Well, I appreciate your candor on that, Mike, and your transparency as such. So let's talk about a little bit about the ticket. So the Wake Up America show is a libertarian show, but I like to say it's a libertarian show not for libertarians. It's a libertarian show for normies, normal people to watch the Wake Up America show.
People.
Layman's people, regular people. So I do ask even my libertarian friends or people that I agree with difficult questions. And when in 2016 I ran for president as a libertarian and took second place to Gary Johnson, I was sort of famously booed for suggesting that we should have laws to protect children from drug dealers and the abuse of drugs or alcohol, meaning that you shouldn't be able to sell heroin to a 5-year-old. And there's an anarchist contingent of the party that doesn't believe that there should be laws that protect children. Now, I'm going to ask you a very difficult question here, and I'd really appreciate it if you didn't dodge, if you could answer it to me straight. I mean, you might as well. You're running for president as a
I'll give it to
libertarian.
you
Spread the
straight,
ideas.
Austin, even if you and I don't see perfectly eye to eye.
Okay, I am deeply concerned about the positions of your presidential ticket when he states that he believes that young people should not be prevented from seeking the kinds of drugs that would result in chemical sterilization of them, Mike. And I'd like to know, honestly, your opinion on whether you think it is the proper role of government to prevent parents even from drugging their children and sterilizing them before they reach the age of reason.
Chase's position, and therefore our team's position, to start out with what's most important, is that the government needs to lay off of this area that has not been settled in terms of science, has not been settled in any number of contexts.
How could you do that to children, Mike? These are children. They have no option to say yes or no.
I'm not arguing with you, Austin. I'll just explain. How about you let me explain our position first, and then you can argue with me.
You tell me your take, Mike. Do you think you should be giving these kinds of drugs to children who have no choice? Stand up and be a man and tell me how you feel, Mike.
I will. And I promised you I will, and I will. But you're going to have to wait 20 seconds for me to give you Chase's position first, okay?
Go ahead. You've got a minute.
Okay. Chase's position and our team's position is that it's okay for the government to step in and make sure that you wait until you're 18 for surgical procedures that are irreversible, that don't have any, medical indication, that are, in some sense discretionary. People need to wait until they're 18 to make these decisions, because you need to be able to participate fully as an adult in making these decisions. And Chase's position is that with regard to chemicals, this is a rapidly evolving area technologically, and therefore it's a gray area. and we're not prepared to invite the government in to criminalize the use of these chemicals, that it needs to be something that's decided between parents and government. It's a very libertarian position. Now, two things that you asked me in addition to that. Number one, my personal feeling with regard to the use of these chemicals, and you've asked my personal feeling about public policy regarding the use of these chemicals. Those are two very different questions. Regarding my personal feeling about the use of these chemicals is completely irrelevant, because as a libertarian, I believe that my opinion about what you should be doing with your life and with your children is irrelevant. Now, you've also asked me about public policy. I personally believe that we know enough about these chemicals to require children to wait until an age of consent until they can fully participate in these decisions, because these chemicals have irreversible effects.
You have said that it is irrelevant what your opinion is. I believe that you, as a leader, make it relevant because you are a person who is representing the values and beliefs of many people who self-identify as libertarians. So what I would like to know, Mike, is do you find it to be immoral personally to offer sterilization drugs to people who have not reached the age of attainment? Your personal moral stance is what I'm asking.
My feeling is that we should be preventing, as a society, children from using these chemicals until they're able to reach an age of consent, because they need to be able to fully participate in these decisions. These decisions are extremely complex. You need to be able to think through things like, are these irreversible? Is my doctor someone I can trust? Is my doctor an idiot? Will I have to find a second opinion? Is my second doctor an idiot? Are my parents giving me the straight stuff? Of whom should I seek another opinion? These are extraordinarily complex decisions that I believe cannot be made until someone is of a certain age.
So I just want to make sure that I'm being clear here. So you do believe it is the proper and necessary role of government to prevent parents from physically, surgically castrating their children, but the question of drugs that would castrate children, that should be left entirely between the parent, the doctor, and the child. You're separating those two issues. The government should intervene in one and not the other.
That is Chase's position and our team's position. My own personal feeling is that there's not a great deal of difference between some of these drugs and surgical procedures, because they are irreversible and therefore require an age of consent to be reached.
So you personally can understand why someone like myself would be deeply disturbed by something like this. So that kind of a position, Mike, because considering the social contagion that's going around this country right now, where these young girls and boys are engaging in irreversible procedures, they're being damaged and harmed by Mike, people that you know very well that are these lefty woke parents that are just trying to fit into their mom's soccer club so that they can all compete in the Victim Olympics and have a trans child, because they're all such desperate attention whores that they would do something terrible to their children. It is a terrible moral crime that we are committing against an entire generation, is it not?
I'm hoping that that's a slight exaggeration, but I agree with the vector you're on. I am very much concerned about the social contagion. I am very much concerned about decisions being made by people who don't have the full panoply of information, whether that's data on outcomes, whether that's information on alternatives, how the chemicals work, how the medicines work together, the long-term implications. These are very, very complex areas. I do not estimate that families are making these decisions lightly, and I certainly don't want to denigrate the decisions made by others. They are making decisions that I will accept people are making in good faith for what they believe are the best decisions for their families. but I do
You're a bigger
believe
man.
that
You're a bigger man than I, because I do not take the left and what they're doing with kids to on good faith. But on that same vein, these are tough questions, Mike, and I appreciate that you're trying your best to answer them. But would you take your own kids to a drag queen story hour, drop them off, and then come back an hour later? Would you leave them unsupervised at a drag queen story hour, a gay man dressed up as a woman? Take your children to an event like that, leave them there unsupervised?
Austin, let me start out with the big picture. My daughter, today is actually her 30th birthday, which is a strange coincidence.
Oh,
I
happy
don't like
birthday.
dropping off my 30-year-old daughter now unsupervised for 2 hours at the grocery store. I'm a little overprotective, so I may not be the right one to ask.
So
But
you would not.
no,
Why not?
like I say, but you know,
Why not?
I am probably not the bar that you want to clear for, you know, the most liberal way to raise your child.
Right. But drag queen story hours for children where they're putting dollar bills, you know, they're dancing like strippers. We've seen photographs of explicit events that are happening there, you know, pictures like "it won't suck itself" signs with 5-year-old children standing up there, children going up on stage and dancing themselves in provocative sexual ways. Mike, is this acceptable to you?
I don't like exposing children to things that I consider to be, you know, sexualized. I don't know whether, you know, you obviously have a particular circumstance in mind about which I am unfamiliar. But to try to answer your question in good faith, I don't like exposing kids to things that are, you know, sexual in nature. To as a stepping stone reference point, you know, my kids, when they were 5 years old, they were at a Baptist preschool. So, you know, I raise my
I was
kids
a
a certain
vacation
way.
Bible
I
school.
don't
Yeah,
necessarily believe that everyone should follow the path that I chose.
no, certainly I understand. And, you know, I was a vacation Bible school teacher for a number of years, but I actually don't consider myself to be a social conservative at all, because for me, what consenting adults do behind closed doors is their own business, and the government should not be involved there, Mike. And you can recognize that the people who are critical of Chase Oliver and his positions are not critical of Chase and Oliver and his positions and your tickets positions on these things because we're homophobic. It's because we're concerned about the rights and the protection of children, which is a completely separate issue. Mike, I believe that adults should be able to go into a store and buy recreational cocaine, but there should be a police officer like your former colleagues ready to stop anyone who would allow it from falling into the hands of children. You can understand the position of someone like myself, right, who has no problem with consenting adults, but that draws the line at children, right?
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And I think that that's not a bad example, that it's okay for us as a society, particularly with decisions made at a local level. It's okay for our communities to decide what kind of criminal code they want and to use that criminal code to protect children. I personally don't believe that our government is worth a damn in almost any regard whatsoever. But if we are going to use government for anything, let it be to protect our children. And this is something at which I believe that we need to get better. To your point, you had brought up that some people, you know, feel differently than Chase does. Chase's position is not that you should be dropping off your children in any particular area for, you know, of education or entertainment. His position, as is mine, is that is a decision that parents should be able to make on their own.
I don't know how I feel about putting children into. I'm fine with states or with local governments setting an age limit for drag shows to be 18 years old and preventing children from.
I get where you're
going
coming
into
from,
drag
but how would
shows.
you legally define a drag show in a way that would? I'm not
I'm sure.
asking really a
Listen,
philosophical question. I'm asking a technical one. How would you do that?
We'll find a way. You know, there's when it comes to the protection of children. You know, I think if you've a little bit left, a little bit right, finding the happy little center. I'm sure that people will be able to figure out a way to define a drag show. But again, listen, like I said, I'm not a social conservative. I've been to dozens and dozens of drag shows in my life, and I've never been to a drag show that they didn't whip out a plastic dong, or that they didn't have somebody doing a strip tease, or that there wasn't explicit language, people drunk, acting like perverts. That's what drag shows are all about. They are inherently sexual, and I think that there's something deeply concerning about people who define themselves through their sexuality. Remember, we're talking about identity politics here, Mike, which is really the big question of the day, is people who identify themselves through their sexuality, saying specifically things like, we're here, we're queer, we're coming for your children. Nobody supported the right of gay marriage harder than myself, or the Supreme Court decision that allowed people to be able to seek out their own happiness as adults. But again, boo me all day long, libertarian anarchists, but I just don't think you ought to be able to sell heroin to children, or perform sexual acts in front of them until they reach the age of 18. These are tough questions and difficult ones, Mike. And I do think that it is important that for Libertarian Party candidates who likely are not going to win the election, that you do be moral leaders for us all and represent us well. And that's really what I think I'm pushing for, because there's no need to act like a politician or evade or dodge any questions when you're running for president as a third party. You might as well stand strong and firm in what you believe and say screw anybody who disagrees with you, because all you really have right now is the opportunity to be is a moral leader.
Well,
correct?
I appreciate that, but this is a public policy office that we are seeking. I am not running to be your pastor. I am a conservative guy. I am socially conservative. By the way, Austin, I think you're probably a little bit socially conservative too. I think you're a lot like I am. But the point is that you and I do not believe that we should be in a position to tell other people how they should raise their kids.
That's wrong. That's wrong. See, libertarianism, we do want to enforce our morality onto government. See, we have a moral belief in a live and let live philosophy. Libertarianism is a moral philosophy. It's not just about cutting taxes. It is about a way of life and a lifestyle that is a culture. We are a culture. Libertarianism is
I think
is a
that
part
you
of
can
culture.
make your case, and you should make your case to the world. I make my case. Anyone who asks me in a different context how they should raise their kids, I'll tell you, get into a good Bible-based school and, avoid exposure to weird crap. I don't have a problem telling my friends that. But as a matter of public policy, I just don't believe that that's an appropriate conversation.
I do. I think it's important for people who, especially in your position, again, when you may be seeking public office, but you're also representing an ideology. You're representing people who, like me, believe in a concept of limited government and politics is downstream from culture, Mike. I mean, I think you can understand that, like, if the culture buys into cultural Marxism, and if people are, wearing Che Guevara t-shirts, the government should allow something like that, but it should be highly discouraged, because we find the
Discouraged by
iconography
whom?
I mean, like, am I not making myself clear? I mean, I'm saying right
No,
now that
discouraged by whom? I do not believe it should be discouraged by the government. I don't
I'm
think
not saying it should be discouraged by the government. I'm talking about the culture here, Mike. I'm talking about being a
Yes,
moral.
I think that
You're trying
you
to say
should
that we should
discourage bad behavior in our
yes,
government
right. We
and
should
in our
discourage
society.
We should be moral leaders, right? Virtue, right? We should encourage virtue, right? Because how are we going to have a free society if we can't behave with virtue? Society breaks down without virtuous men and women behaving virtuously, which means that we have to have morality, or else we're going to lose our liberty.
And I have never said anything other than that. But you are correct that government policy is downstream from culture and must be. And those who don't recognize that try to affect our society at our peril. I do not believe that you should be using government as a tool to try to affect culture.
It's hard. That's a difficult question, and I think one we won't be able to solve here today, Mike, but it has been an interesting conversation today. I'd like to give you the opportunity, if there's anything else that you think that we haven't covered that you'd like to cover now, or anything that you'd like to plug, or a message for our listeners, I'll give you the final word.
Well, I appreciate that. And by the way, I appreciate the conversation as well. I've always had a tremendous amount of respect for you, Austin, personally, and your ability to think through issues. So I'm grateful for these minutes together. Look, I think that Chase and I both believe that the big issues are keeping our government from propagating war around the world, that we can save a lot of money and a lot of lives by ending this militaristic view of how we should be conducting foreign policy, that we need to be reducing government spending, that we need to be replacing the Federal Reserve System with a rules-based system that says, no, our government cannot create as much money as it wants willy-nilly whenever it's in the mood. And these are the big issues that'll put more money in people's pocketbooks, that'll make us safer as a nation and a society. And these are the big issues.
Where can people go to find out more about your campaign, Mike?
They can go to votechaseoliver.com. They can go to miketermaat.com. They can go to goldnewdeal.org and read all you want. The website's all linked together. And I believe that you will see, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent or a libertarian, you'll see a platform that aligns better with your values than the other parties do.
There it is, Mike Ter Meet, vote Chase Oliver. One last thing real quick. If a list of names, someone asked me to put on a short list for the cabinet position, Mike Ter Meet's name is on it. Keep it there, right?
Absolutely. Okay. Or sign me up for vacation Bible school too.
Mike, have a good one, brother. Good luck out there on the campaign trail. We'll hope you'll come back and update us as things go along.
I'll see you tomorrow. Take care.
Thanks, Mike. Have a good one.